do you believe that everybody, regardless of gender, should be equal? And she was like, yes. And I was like, congratulations, you're a feminist. You know, it's that simple. And I was like, if you don't believe that, then you're sexist.
What does gender inequality and feminism mean to you? And have you ever experienced it in the workplace or in your own life, or perhaps in your child's school? These are questions that we talk about today as I interview this incredible guest. Her name is Maureen Devine-Ahl, and I found her because she wrote this book called How to Make the Matriarchy. And in our interview, she tells us where her idea for this book was born, how she went through the process of learning and researching about feminism, not just in America, but around the world, and how it's impacted her subsequently. We also talk about how the pandemic has affected women, especially moms, who have had to choose between staying at home and homeschooling or giving up their careers or their jobs. This one is a fabulous episode, especially if you've always thought, am I really a feminist? What does a feminist actually mean? We dive into all of that in this interview. I hope you enjoy. Hello and welcome to the Business of Happiness podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Tarryn MacCarthy, and today is going to be such a great day because we're speaking to somebody who has worked with teams revolutionizing education, women's rights, affordable housing. She has spent 2 decades in the nonprofit, social, and public service sector as a coach, guiding leaders to build a better world. And the reason why I am asking her to speak on our show today is because she just released a book called How to Make the Matriarchy. And you can't see the cover or if you're listening to the show, but it says How to Smash the Patriarchy, crossed out How to Make the Matriarchy. Please welcome the one and only Maureen Devine-Ahl. Welcome.
Thank you. And yes, I'm so glad you said something about the cover. That was like such a design thing that we went back and forth on, but it was really important to me to be like, smash the patriarchy. That's not what we're going for. Like, let's talk about making and creating and coming together. And that was a big inspiration for me while I was writing. So
well, that was so well done because I understood immediately your viewpoint when I read the cover and I saw that part of the cover. So please tell us a little bit more about the book and what your impetus was for writing it.
Yeah. So the book is here. It's somebody just said yesterday, oh, so you gave birth. And I'm like, yes, it's kind of like that. It is kind of like that, but now I'm on the other side of it, which is like almost the same as parenting, where you get to like show off your baby and nurture your baby and share your baby with the world. So yeah, and I am a mom, so it's interesting. That was sort of the impetus for writing the book. There was an incident in my daughter's 2nd grade class where she came home with a class project to pick a historical figure to emulate for what they were calling a wax museum. So there was going to be kind of a living wax museum that parents could visit on a Friday afternoon. And the list she came home with ended up being just 2 female historical figures to choose from and 8 male historical figures to choose from. And so I got in touch with the school and was like, hey, can we fix this? Like, this is a little off balance. And the school wrote me back and said, well, that's just the list from the curriculum. And I went, what now? So I decided to dig into our state's curriculum, and there it was, right in the 2nd grade curriculum. Like, that's the like mandatory list of historical figures to be sure that they cover. Of course, teachers can always do more, but so yeah, that I ended up reading our entire state's curriculum and found that in the entire history curriculum, only about 10% of the curriculum specifically lists like female historical figures that the students have to know about by the time they graduate. And I went like, how is this right under my nose? And I didn't even know it, So yeah, that was the impetus for the book. It was really like this question I asked myself of like gender equality. What are the remaining barriers? What don't I know about? And what's the work that I can take on in my lifetime to get us closer? And I do a corner on education and talk about that story, but end up finding a lot of other really interesting things going on around the world. And that's what makes up the book.
Wow, that's fascinating. I'm so impressed with that, kind of sparking that interest in you, and then just looking for, what don't I know about? What is, I love that phrase, what's just right under my nose that I didn't even realize we were teaching our daughters in the education system in 2020, 2021 in America. Yeah. So what did you find? What were some of the most shocking discoveries?
Yeah, so I end up kind of saying that the book takes on this puzzle analogy that I kind of like go around the world and it's like, ooh, there's a piece and there's a piece and there's a piece. But I get to a point where, I'm looking through a lot of the big, global indices on like who's really closed their gender gaps. Where are the most, peaceful and secure places for women to live around the world? Where are the places in the world who have the most women in leadership, in parliamentary representation? Who's made the most gains there? And sort of what I call the four corners of my puzzle start to emerge. And that is where the work is. And that is in education, as I mentioned, that's in economic empowerment, that's in violence against women or gender-based violence, and then that's in women's health. And I tack on what starts to emerge as, I call it a fifth corner, but it honestly might be like the centerpiece of the puzzle, and that is women in leadership. Because time and time again, almost all success stories came back to a moment when, women were really empowered into decision-making rooms or into leadership or into parliament. And when their voices and their experiences are included in important decision-making, suddenly communities start to change for the better. It's proven over and over and over again. One story that just sticks with me so poignantly is, so I was looking for, who's number one in parliamentary representation, who has the most women like leading their government. Do you have any guesses?
I was going to guess New Zealand.
Yeah, that's what a lot of people guess, and that's probably what I would have guessed too. It's actually Rwanda. So,
I read about this recently. That's right.
Yeah. So Rwanda, fluctuates a little bit after each election, but I think that right now they're at about 61% of their parliament is made up of women. And you go, well, what? How did that happen? And it's just this amazing story that after the Rwandan genocide in 1994, the majority of the people left in that country actually were women. And suddenly it went from a place that had been really oppressive for women to a place that needed to rely on its women to rebuild. And so, women became judges, they became, teachers, they suddenly had economic empowerment, they could suddenly own land. And this rapid progress followed, total systemic change for that country to now it's a place that has made these rapid advances in 20 or 30 years that you go, okay, like 20 or 30 years progress that quick. So it's possible, right? So that's one place that really blew my mind. And then you see, you see sprinklings of that around the world too. I read Melinda Gates has an amazing book. It's called The Moment of Lift. And she tells a lot of similar stories about her work around the world, trying to end poverty and trying to improve health outcomes. And they just kept coming back to like, empower the mothers, because then they take it back to their families, and then families get healthier, kids get more educated, and communities rise. And it's all of that I took with me, and that's how I landed on the subtitle for the book. I had a whole bunch of different choices at one point in time, but it really is this power and promise of prioritizing women to change the world is just so obvious to me now.
Oh, so cool. I see a beautiful parallel between you and Melinda Gates in that, in that story, in that book, Moment of Lift, she also was just investigating, just discovering, just walking down. There's that iconic scene where she's standing in line, the vaccination lines, and just talking to women and one of the women says to her, "Where's the vaccine for pregnancy?"
Yeah, yeah,
how can I not add more children to my household here? But I love that idea of women just seeking to support and help one another, and to
mhm,
see what is happening right under my nose. How can I open my eyes to the truth and the reality, and then spark a movement for change?
yeah,
So I honor you, Maureen, that you're
yeah,
doing this. Thank you.
yeah. Thank you. Yeah,
Thank you.
I I got advice before I wrote the book to write about something you're curious about, and that was really what drove me on this journey. Was just stay curious, keep like
Mm.
picking up the pieces, and which piece connects to the next piece that's you can get curious and interested about, and yeah, curiosity is such a powerful tool.
Did you learn anything about yourself during this journey?
Yeah. I think I have so much more confidence after this journey, just in my ability and the need for me to speak up and like be heard. My confidence, but also like I just want to gift that confidence to like every woman I meet now who, thinks they don't belong in a leadership space, or thinks that whatever they're wrestling with they just need to wrestle with and figure it out themselves. Like that's not it. Like the stories and the data are there. So I'm just like, speak up, talk, get curious, tell me what you learned, change something. And that's one of the sort of chapters towards the end of the book is my list of like what I'm changing from big to small. And it's been so rewarding. So many women I know, friends, family, neighbors, of course, have supported me on this journey. And I just got a text, from a neighbor this week that was like, I just finished your book and it has completely changed my life and the way that I think.
Cool.
And yeah, that's the part that's so rewarding to me and just keeps me going on this journey of like, just keep talking, keep being curious, keep meeting people where they're at and seeing what they're curious about, and like sprinkle a little bit of what and some resources. And I really think that that's, where a groundswell of change can start to come from.
Absolutely. And I love the idea of empowering women to stand up and take that power back, because,
Mhm.
especially in light of recent events in the past year and a half, it's the moms who have had the biggest challenge with homeschooling, having to make really difficult choices about staying home, keeping their job, finding childcare, all
Yep.
of those additional stresses that have come with the responsibility of motherhood has fallen to women,
Yep.
and so I really love your mission to just empower women again to seek a way to put back the power in their lives.
Yeah.
Have you encountered stories like these of other women who have just felt like it's not fair, just because I'm the mom, just because I'm the woman, all of these additional responsibilities have fallen to me?
Yes. Though it's interesting that you ask that question. I think if anything, what I'm experiencing is women who know that, but we've just accepted it like as it is, or like I need to work harder, or I need to step up, or I think we internalize a lot of this, like it's just the way that it is, so we need to do it. We need to get tough. And even like we accept things like, well, we're better multitaskers, so like we'll just get it done, or like we're more empathetic, so like we'll get it done, we'll just do it. And the reality is like all of that stuff is just made up. It's not real. We don't have to accept it. And I think that's really what I've seen some shifts from in women who have reached back out to me and said, like, I never really considered that these are systemic things that I'm just accepting. And I'm going,
Mm.
this is okay. And I've learned to live within. And really what I need to do is bust that open and be like, no, what does better look like? What are my ideas about better? And how do I start to do that? And that can be as simple as like starting it in your home and being like, hey, spouse, we need to have a conversation about a more equal division of labor in our household. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
start there. Or it can be in the workplace. It can be in your children's school, like my experience. It can there's a space for everybody to do it. That's what's the beautiful thing. You don't have to be a policymaker. You don't have to be the head of a giant organization. There's like literally somewhere within each of our spheres of influence that we can lean in and go like, no, I don't accept this anymore. Like, how are we going to do this? How can we do this differently? Which I love. It's beautiful.
You know, one thing as a business owner myself, and with actually all women on my team in my business, one thing that my partner and I have always struggled with is maternity leave.
Yeah.
You know, we have such values, high values in terms of being able to be there to support your family and to be there to recover your body after childbirth and to connect and to bond and to start your family off, you know, with a good amount of time and energy that you need for yourself to recover and to rebuild after childbirth. And our business sector and our social system is set up in such a way that it really is detrimental to businesses and to your own position in a business if you take 3, 4, 5 months off of work.
Mm-hmm.
Have you found other cultures or other systems that do this better?
Yeah. Yeah, so I talk a lot about the Nordic countries. So the Nordic countries jostle for like the top 5 spots on the gender equality indices, on the, you know, women's safety and health indices, and then also on like the happiness indices. And so you're like, okay, what's going on there? And there's a really, you know, beautiful story about Sweden that I tell in the book. You know, Sweden was one of the first places in the world to do maternity leave paid maternity leave, guaranteed paid maternity leave back in the 70s. But they didn't stop there. They tracked it. They tracked like, what are the outcomes? And they realized that by just enabling moms, maternity, to stay home, which of course is important, but it meant that moms were then like establishing all the routines in the household, like taking on the bulk of the caregiving responsibilities and establishing these patterns that then stuck with families for a long time. And they weren't seeing the outcomes that they were going for when they thought that they, you know, were guaranteeing this right and this privilege for moms in their country. So they leveled up and they made it parental leave to include like guaranteed maternity leave that's just guaranteed to moms, and then also like a guaranteed use or lose paternity leave that, you know, only fathers have to take, right? And then very generous parental leave that can be used up until your kid is like 7 years old, because you and I both know it's not it doesn't end after the first 3 months of like needing flexible time for caregiving. But since they made that change, they really have seen, you know, their gender gaps close. An article I read, you know, talks about how it's almost shameful amongst the guys now if you don't take that benefit that's guaranteed to you. Like, guys look at each other and be like, why aren't you taking that?
Fascinating.
Yeah, and there's a journalist who writes about, you know, walking around in Sweden, and she's like, I've been warned to expect them, like the Swedish dads, and they're the ones, you know, they got the baby strapped to their chests and they're pushing the strollers. And so yeah, the Nordic countries and the story of Sweden specifically, there's a lot we can learn from them. And I think that was something really beautiful that I learned, that was like, you know, we can rethink this, we can do better, because then some of the outcomes are more women in the workforce, you know, more women surviving in the workforce, pay gaps close, like all the little ripple effects happen when you empower families, you know, to start off in a different place than we currently do. So yeah, there are places doing it better than us, for sure.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And maybe COVID would have affected them differently then, because as you said, they hadn't already had these entrenched ideas that mom is home when you need her and only mom is home, but perhaps dad can be home too.
Yeah. That parenting is a shared thing.
Yeah.
It takes two. That mom has a special role, and this is the other part of like Make the Matriarchy a little bit in the health corner. I talk about, you know, truly appreciating women though as like, you know, the only species that can be regenerative and create life, but that, you know, we don't just sort of like use them for that we value that, you know, that maternity time, that post-childbirth time, as you mentioned, is not just about being there because you have a responsibility to take care of a child, but it's about our own healing.
Absolutely.
Our bodies do this crazy thing. We need time to regenerate and restore as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the things that I love from a quote of yours, you mentioned something about how your second favorite F word is feminism.
Yeah.
What does feminism mean to you in light of all this research that you've done? What does that
Yeah.
mean? And this follow-up question is, how did that affect the title of your book?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so great question. You know, I grew up in like a tiny little town in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by like cows and farmers and conservative thinking. And I think if you had asked me in my formative years if I was a feminist, I probably would have said like, oh, no, I don't think that's a good thing. Like, I'm not angry. I don't want to like take men down. And I probably carried a little bit of that with me my entire life. And something I write later in the book is I discovered that there is a fierce feminist hanging out inside, and she's always been there. She's been there, you know, screaming at me when she sees something that's not fair. It's like that like twinge you get in your stomach. Like now I recognize and appreciate that that's where she is. But you know, feminism shouldn't be linked to you know, anger and outrage and some of the negative things that it absolutely is. You know, I put it to a friend this way. I was like, do you believe that everybody, regardless of gender, should be equal? And she was like, yes. And I was like, congratulations, you're a feminist. You know, it's that simple. And I was like, if you don't believe that, then you're sexist. And she kind of went like, oh, okay, cool, I get it. And it was funny because later this same friend who's just been a lifetime friend, she actually reached out to me about that section of the book. She's like, you know, I know you say you just discovered your fierce feminist. She's like, I have seen her there forever. So yeah, I really am trying to, you know, talk around that word or just find new language, like whatever word resonates with you. If you believe that everybody, you know, regardless of gender, should be equal, then you're a feminist, you're an anti-sexist, you're a pro-matriarchy, whatever you want to call yourself. I think, you know, taking some of the power out of the words or putting power into new words potentially. If that's what helps get you going, then I'm all for it.
If you're listening to this podcast, chances are you didn't get into business to be miserable. The problem is that people feel that if their business gets busier, if they start becoming more successful, that happiness will eventually set in. But it can actually get worse. This is why I created the Business of Happiness Prosperity Coaching. In this one-on-one coaching, we look at how to redefine success on your terms and re-find the joy and the passion in your dream. Visit me at thebizofhappiness.com and become the happiest business owner you know.
And so how did that translate into your title of your book? So specifically crossing out the words smash the patriarchy.
Yeah. I was having lunch with a girlfriend one day and, you know, we were griping about some unfair things that were going on in a workplace. And she like smashed her fist on the table and was like, you know, smash the patriarchy, right? And I went, oh, you know, it's just like, it's that anger. I can never find myself in that rage, that like, this isn't war. And I was like, I don't know, why can't we just make the matriarchy? And she like leaned in and she was like, I like that. How do we do that? Tell me more. And that's really where, you know, that was going on around the same time as the incident at my daughter's school, that all of this started to come together, that I was like, okay, what if instead of smashing and destroying and like gender war, us versus them, we turn to like making, building, creation. And I do spend a whole chapter going, well, are there existing matriarchies around the world and what can we learn from them? And there are societies in the world operating as matriarchies, and they've got some great lessons, and then they've got some great cautionary tales too, you know.
Wow, please tell us about one of them.
Yeah. So there's I would say Costa Rica is a really interesting place to look at, where there are existing matriarchal societies. And part of what I write was my biggest takeaway about learning from these matriarchies, because there are some matriarchies that, as I explored, some of their cultures and their traits started to feel like just the opposite of patriarchy. Like it was still kind of oppressive then for the men in their society, with women holding a lot more power. But there was a scholar I came upon who studies matriarchies, and she said something really beautiful that I carried with me through the rest of the book. And that is that, patriarchy and matriarchy are more about systems of power than about gender. And so patriarchy is about power over others. It's about building systems in which power over others is the goal. Whereas matriarchy, she said, are about the power of inclusion. Not power over, it's power of inclusion. And I think it's some of these matriarchal societies where, the women are revered and they are in leadership, but in equal and inclusive ways. Like decision-making happens equally and inclusively. And they recognize that the outcomes for their communities are better when everybody is included, when there's, not power in certain areas and certain sectors. And so, yeah, there's these beautiful little villages in Costa Rica that I talk about that are matriarchal societies that have done some amazing work, really restoring the land around them, valuing the land around them, building businesses in ways that helps them build, more like eco-centric villages. One of them, has this chocolate drink that is like really central to their culture. And so I joke, like, a village where like women are loved and revered, and I imagine it smells like chocolate all the time. I was like, sign me up. Sign me up.
I love it. I love it. It's so cool. How have you noticed that this has affected you? Just the process of writing the book. Has it changed anything about you and in terms of your perspective of feminism and the way that we can support women and empower women in leadership?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things that come to mind, and I think we've talked about a little bit of it. Like, what I want to get out there and champion is that this isn't a fight. This isn't a war. There isn't, this like tranche of angry feminists who just want like all men to like go hide under the bed for the rest of humanity. I've actually been really blown away by the feedback from men who have read the book, who are like, I didn't feel shamed. I don't feel like this is a book about telling me all the ways in which I need to, step aside or whatever. But that they're just as curious about the outcomes. They're like, I have daughters and sisters and mothers and grandmothers and all of those things. And, they want good lives for everybody in their life. And they have really leaned in and also been curious to say, like, I've never really sat down to think about these things thoroughly and think about my role in them and think about how I can be more of an ally. And so it's been interesting to have conversations with some of these guys about like, what is allyship? What will it take for you when you see something going on to go, wait a minute, I'm not okay with this. And if I've got, the microphone, if I've got, the attention of everybody in the room, how do I bring this up? How do I create space for my female peers and start to bring down some of these barriers? So yeah, that has been a really beautiful part of the journey. And then I think just the author journey in general. It was so wonderful. I spent the bulk of my writing time was through 2020. I started before the pandemic, but kind of how I whiled away my quarantine time. And it it was funny. There was one week where it was like shipped off to copy editing. And when you ship it off to copy editing, they're like, don't touch the don't change anything because then copy editors will be reading a different version than what you have. So they're like, hands off. And that was the first weekend that I think there was like nothing I could do for the book, like nothing I could do. And I like found myself looking around going like, like, what have I been doing all year? Is this what quarantine is like? And by Sunday afternoon, I was literally sitting out in my driveway in a lawn chair watching like a storm roll in. Like I was just watching the clouds, and I was like, I guess this is it. I guess this is what you do when you don't have chapters and chapters to write each weekend. But in a way, I'm so grateful for it, that I had it, that I could still, in a way, leave my house and look around the world and expand my brain and get excited about, as you mentioned, what COVID was bringing to the forefront for us about caregiving, about how moms and women pick up so much of the slack, about that they were measuring that almost 4 million women have left the workforce during COVID, and that decades of progress on women in the workforce could be erased in 1 year. Like, these are not conversations we were having 2 years ago. And we are now in really big ways. So I felt, and still do feel, the universe, puts you where you're meant to be.
Yeah.
And I felt that in a big way last year, that I was looking at something I was curious about, that it was anchored to a project that kept my mind working during a difficult time, and that it turned out to be a really relevant subject to get to know more about, that has just left me feeling so much better prepared to be active and change the world as we now rebuild and figure out our new ways forward.
I mean, I think that speaks hugely to your character as well, because it takes a lot of courage to dive into something like this. This is a big subject. This is heady, and you took on not only America, but the world.
Yeah.
And, also at a time when people were hurting and when people were fearful. And so that speaks hugely to your courage to do this. And I also love the idea of having a passion and a purpose when you're faced with fear. And that really gives you the strength and the fuel to move forward.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. I agree. And it's funny that you mentioned the word courage, because that is sort of a topic I've been percolating around, potentially for a next book. So I did learn that I love to write and love to have a project, a curiosity project to be working on. And the word courage keeps coming up, because I think, the lesson on the other side of this is that it does take a lot of courage to lean into these subjects. It's going to continue to take a lot of courage from each and every one of us to speak up when we see something that we don't agree with, or that's not right, or change our businesses, or change our families. Change whatever little thing we're going to change takes courage every time. And, as I'm thinking about a courage project, like, how do I get out there now and talk about courage and learn about what is the makeup of courage, and how we can each cultivate a little bit more of it in our lives every day. So.
Absolutely. And I think you touched on it in your book as well, in terms of being courageous enough to look at those biases that we have grown up with, or that we've just taken for granted. But that takes courage, when you've been acting a certain way or speaking a certain way for a long time, and then courageously looking back and saying, but now I know better. And it's okay for me to evolve from this place, as opposed to stubbornly holding on to the way you used to feel, and to justify your actions or the things, the way you felt, or even your beliefs.
Yeah. Yeah. And what comes to mind too, when you mentioned that, another thing that was beautiful about this process is I was sharing it with, like, my tribe, my girlfriends, as I was writing. I would find something cool or interesting, or that blew my mind, and I would call them up and be like, did you know this? Can you believe this?
Yeah.
And it would inspire such a great conversation that made us all do exactly as you just said, like, reflect on our biases, reflect on what do we believe to be true, and how can we sit with it and simmer with it, and then encourage each other moving forward to, like, change and try different, and cheer each other on, because that courage, it does take friends, or it's better with friends, let's put it that way.
Yeah, sometimes you need to borrow courage.
Exactly.
Sometimes
Right.
that's the best you could do, is borrow somebody else's. Yeah.
Right. And cheer each other on through the hard work. And I think, again, that's, like, really in the spirit of my book, is like, let's come together and build and cheer and grow, and find the places where we connect and mutually benefit.
Yeah. Oh, it's beautiful. Thank you so much for writing this book. So
Yeah.
cool. So cool. I'm so grateful to you for being courageous enough to take on this adventure. And it sounds like it sparked in you a whole new passion for writing more and expressing yourself more. And I can just see how incredible that is as a role model for your daughter as well, just of what you can do even when you think you're done.
Yeah.
When you think you found out all your superpowers, there's might still be more in there if you're just willing to look.
Yeah. Yeah. And thank you for mentioning my daughter. It's been amazing actually to see how she has responded to the book. Obviously, it's not a kid's book, so she hasn't read it, but like she is like, this is cool, mom. Like you wrote a book, and she has a signed copy up in her bedroom, and she's like, when I'm old enough, like I'm going to do it. But it did also, like, we picked up some new things for her bookshelf because it inspired a curiosity in her as well, and even like her little circle of friends. So I have a Make the Matriarchy sticker, and I was literally just at the bus stop this morning and they all have it on their water bottles. Like
Oh,
my daughter handed out stickers, and I'm
so
like,
cute.
cool and cute. And so yes, if I can plant that seed of curiosity in them and get them thinking about it early in their lives, like that's just a bonus in this process.
So I'm fascinated to know, how has this affected your happiness? I mean, I don't know where you were before you wrote this book, but how has it impacted you in terms of just finding this purpose and feeling so passionately about it, and then giving yourself permission to persevere and to pursue this exciting passion? How has that impacted you in terms of your inner fulfillment?
Yeah. The answer that like comes right up is I just feel so much more centered now. Like
Huh.
I feel like I have like flunked into that centered rut that I have always belonged in. And I think it is because I collected so much like data and stories that I'm like, I don't now just believe this to be true or suspect this to be true. I know it to be true, and I feel it in my core. And so it has impacted my happiness to just feel that sense of stability in knowing what I know and choosing to live from that place of knowing now. I will say though, there are moments where knowledge can like mess with your happiness too.
Absolutely. Yes.
Because when you things, you're like, oh, I know that that's not how that should be. I know that could be better. I know that we could have chosen differently there. And so, and that, look, I actually like respect that. That's probably where the smash the patriarchy stuff comes from, because sometimes this stuff is thick and it's heavy and you do just want to like rage for a little bit and blow it up. Um, but again, I most often I come back to like, I know this, and the world gets better when we live this, and lives get better, and children's lives get better. There's so much more good and potential in all of it. And it's great to spend time there thinking and dreaming and working.
Yeah, and I think that the passion is also really good. Even if it dips into a little bit of anger every now and then, it doesn't have to stay there. And all it is an indicator of how important this is to you. When
Yeah.
you feel really fired up about something, it means it matters. It wouldn't matter if you could just blow it off. So
Yeah.
I think that in terms of it, looking at that emotion and that anger more as an indicator of where your values are and what you feel passionately about is a great way to look at it. So what does happiness mean to you? What is the definition of happiness for Maureen?
Yeah. I mean, I think happiness is, well, look, I've done a lot of work, I think, in the last couple of years. Happiness is definitely self-love. And I think, that connects to a lot of what I just said, like
Yeah.
resolving maybe some dissonance that had been going on internally for me for years. Like, is this right? It feels right, but I don't know that it's factually right. With that dissonance resolved, it kind of cracked open a new space to be like, oh, like fierce feminist, there you are. I love you. I'm not in conflict with you. Like, I love you. Like you've been there shouting at me and protecting me and pushing me. And so there is an element of self-love that I think is important in happiness. But I also think, happiness is something that we can all choose to cultivate. And I think it's a practice, just like so many other things are. It's a practice of tapping into what brings you joy, and seeking out those things and creating space and time for those things, and not feeling guilt or shame around those things. Coming back to the like moms carry everything, I think we also carry a lot of guilt and shame when we carve out time for our own happiness. And it shouldn't be that way. Like happiness is something we all deserve, something that we need to cultivate, and ultimately makes us more whole humans to be in the world when we do. So, I champion the work, but I champion the rest as well.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So what has this journey for you shown you to be your superpower?
Oh, that's a great question. I actually think my superpower is this like power of convening. And it's because I've just met so many different people who could still find something in this work, in this book, that they went like, that really sparked my curiosity. That I have a question about this, or I've really been thinking about this now. And it really is. It's like from dads in my neighborhood who are now like stopping me on a dog walk to be like, I read this in your book and then I saw it at work the other day. And I'm like, yeah, there it is. And now he's like, and I'm thinking about that now. I can't get it out of my mind. What do I do? And I think it's that. It's like this power of convening and conversation and holding space for people. So many people have come back to me and said, like, I saw myself in this book and now I feel really comfortable talking to you about this. And I feel more comfortable in challenging these things or learning about these things. So superpower, convening and holding conversation and holding space. And I love doing it as well.
So cool. So cool. So this question I ask of all my guests, and it's a painful one when you've just published a book and birthed a book. I apologize ahead of time. My question is, if your book were to disappear, and I know that would hit you hard, and all of the amazing work that you've been doing in so many arenas and people's lives that you've been impacting, and all your written words were to disappear, and you knew that you could leave us with something, you could leave your daughter with something for her to keep up in her bedroom on her bedside table, what would that be? What would that message be for your daughter?
Yeah. I mean, one that comes to mind, it's interesting when you frame it as like, if your book were to disappear, like what's the thing that you would take out? And there is like a sentence in the book that I love, although it's interesting then when you ask the question, framing it to my daughter, I don't know if I'd have the same answer. So let's go like duality here. If the book were just to absolutely evaporate and I could just take one thing that stays with the universe, what I ended up writing was like, we must be in a race to replace the patriarchy. Like, it's not about smashing it. We're in a race to replace it because it's a system that is failing all of us one way or another. And so yeah, this race to replace, I think is something that comes to me like that's what I would love to stay out in the universe if the book vanished overnight. To my daughter, I think it skews more to this like curiosity and happiness and like finding yourself and loving yourself and being like, what are you curious about? What really matters to you? What do you notice that gives you a little twist in your stomach that you want to get curious about and say, I think this should be different. It's more the courage and the curiosity, I think, that I would want to make sure that I gifted to her if the book were to vanish overnight.
Which is fascinating because it's a very feminine perspective. Those are very feminine superpowers, so I think everybody tapping into those could really support that endeavor to replace the patriarchy. I think if we all did those things, that would be a big step towards replacing patriarchy. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so grateful to have met you, Maureen, and even more grateful to you for writing this book and I'm so excited to share this with my audience as well. So how can my audience find you? We'll definitely keep all of your links in the show notes, but if somebody wanted to reach out to you and find out more, how could they find you?
Yeah. So, I mean, social media wise, I'm most active on LinkedIn. So you can find me there just under my name, Maureen Devine-Ahl. And that's been beautiful too, because a lot of people have been reaching out to me there using the messaging part of the system. And it's just so easy. So I'm happy to connect with any folks there. I'm also on Instagram at Make the Matriarchy. So you can follow me along there too, where I post stuff from the book and other interesting things. And then I guess, business wise, my company is called Candor and Company. I do coaching and consulting for change makers, which this journey has taught me that anybody can call themselves a change maker. So I don't work specifically with women, although I certainly do prioritize wanting to get women into leadership and then help them thrive once they're there. But look, I'm happy to work with men who are ready to tackle allyship and a better understanding and changing their workplaces by leveraging, the power that they already have access to. So Candor and Company is where you can find me for that type of work.
You are an amazing woman, amazing human being.
Thank you. That means a lot
to
me.
Thank you for all you do. Thank you so much. And thank you too for joining us today on this episode of the Business of Happiness podcast. I hope that this was of value to you. It was so amazing for me to get to meet Maureen and to hear about her story. And I do welcome you to look up her book and read more. And until next time, today's going to be a great day. Bye-bye.